Every form of life on our planet depends on two things: heat and water. The presence of heat is essential for life to develop, but alone it is not enough. Without water, without moisture, the surface of the earth would be a lifeless desert. For a seed to germinate, we know it needs soil and generous watering. And yet we cannot help noticing that sometimes nothing at all is born from a seed, and we wonder why. It is not an easy question to answer. To do so, we will have to look into the mysterious factors which, like the works of an immense clock, measure out the complex timing of life, the cycles of the seasons, the rhythms of living creatures. Those same mechanisms also control the most important rhythms affecting our bodies, especially in the woman's reproductive cycle. Every woman carries inside her a kind of internal clock which regulates a vital function, that of procreating, of giving life to a child. Let us think of a woman's body as if it were the soil in which we would like to plant seed. The soil needs rain and moisture to be fertile. Something similar is true of a woman's body during the fertile phase of her monthly cycle, when she is aware of the presence of moisture.
She feels the sensation of wetness and sees the appearance of mucus after a time of dryness outside the vagina as she goes about her daily work. Every woman during her fertile years can be easily taught to recognize this sensation and identify her fertile phase when this mucus secretion is present in her body. At first, the mucus looks cloudy and sticky. Then it becomes progressively clearer and more elastic, with a wet, slippery sensation. This, then, is the moisture we have been talking about.
Let us go back to the clock that accompanied our first encounter with this subject. As a starting point, we will take the most evident and familiar event, menstruation, and mark it in red. After menstruation, there is usually a time of dryness or drought. We will mark it in brown, like the dry soil. Then comes the first indication of the moist time, in the form of a particular type of mucus, as we have already seen. We will mark this phase in white. Another time of dryness follows, once again colored brown. This dry time lasts until the beginning of the next menstruation. We will mark this with red, and the cycle begins again. One glance is enough to see the part of the cycle when the seed can germinate and eventually bear fruit. Obviously, not here, or here when the ground is dry, as arid as the desert. It is much more likely to germinate here, when moisture is present, when there is mucus in the woman's body.
But the clock is not identical for all women, and not even for one woman. It can change over the years. So let us take a very careful look at this vital mechanism. We open up the workings of the clock and spread them out. Let us divide this strip up into a series of boxes, one for each day of the month. The 30 boxes correspond to a cycle of 30 days. We will use this standard cycle as a basis for understanding shorter or longer cycles. Let us begin by marking the days of menstruation: 1, 2, 3, perhaps 4, 5. Now the dry time begins. We will note these days on our chart. Next, we have the start of the moist time, when it is possible for a seed to germinate. This is when women become potentially fertile. The first day, the mucus is sticky, dense, not elastic, and it may be a slightly creamy color. It is not necessary to touch the vaginal area with the fingers to notice this difference. The pictures are only examples of how the mucus appears. As the days go by, it becomes more clear, elastic, and transparent. Accompanied by a wet, slippery sensation and a strong feeling of lubrication. Then a change takes place and the mucus becomes cloudy, sticky in appearance, and the sensation of wetness and lubrication disappears altogether. This indicates that the last day in which the mucus was still clear, slippery, and lubricative was the peak day.
We mark it in a special way to distinguish it from all others, because this is an important day by the clock which measures out a woman's life. The one day when she possesses her maximum degree of fertility and she is most likely to become pregnant. Remember, the peak day can be identified by the woman only the following day when the mucus has changed appearance or may have disappeared altogether. Let us leave the 3 days following the peak day attached to it, to show that they too are fertile days, even though gradually less so, as we will see later. The 4th day after the peak day marks the beginning of infertile time. During this time, without moisture, a woman cannot conceive. Let us follow the remaining days of the cycle on the chart until the start of the next cycle. The length of time between the peak day and the start of menstruation is relatively constant, about 2 weeks. What makes a cycle longer or shorter is only the number of days between menstruation and the arrival of the peak day. The dry days before the mucus begins may be completely absent, or they may go on for longer than usual, even for weeks.
A woman never knows in advance how long her cycle will last, but to get to know the clock regulating her fertility does not call for any calculation. All she has to do is to observe herself every day to see whether the mucus has made its appearance and how it behaves.
Independent of regularity or lack of regularity of her cycle, or the special situation she may be in, such as breastfeeding or when she is nearing the change of life, the presence and behavior of mucus informs her of the state of her fertility. It is as simple as that.
This is the clock which marks a woman's fertility. Once you understand it, you will realize how reliable and precise it can be. Make good use of it.
Let us imagine 2 houses. In each of them lives a happily married young couple. Let us meet